Hey, this is Kat the Humanist, and welcome you to Women Atheists Unload. This is a show made by women for everybody. So, Wes, when you're ready, let's get rolling.
I know you told your friend you're not okay, and tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you here. Today we're actually going to be talking about women as property, and we've got a nice little slideshow to go over, so I'm pretty excited about this today. So I'm just going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves first. So let's start with Apostate Anne.
Hi, everyone. I'm Apostate Anne, and I co-host a YouTube channel called Apostate of Mind with my husband, who was a former pastor and graduated with a master's in biblical studies and since became atheist. So our channel is really sharing academic information on the Bible and what the scholars are saying. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And Fern Lovebond, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, there is so little to tell. I'm just a little harmless houseplant that happens to care very much about truth, and that has led me to reject my religious upbringing and, well, basically oppose religion since. So, there you go.
Well, hey, who doesn't love plants, and especially ferns? We're so glad to have you here. And
Why, thank
Deborah, you're welcome. Deborah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a former believer of over 41 years. My ex was a youth pastor, and I'm an author of the book Crucifying the Bible. It's available on Amazon in all the formats, so go get yourself a copy. I have a second book that should be out shortly. I know I keep saying that, but I've had some delays. Can't help them. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, I'm excited about that second book, but you know, life is life, right? There's only so much you can do. Well, today, I think this is a good thing to talk about, our title, Women as Property, because that's kind of something we've kind of struggled with for thousands of years, correct? And one of the main problems with it is religion. And so, Apostate, I think I'm going to have you go ahead and get us going on the slideshow that we've got here.
So yeah, I figured we'll start from the beginning, from the Hebrew Bible, and go Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, and start with Numbers. Since we're talking about women as property, this is very clearly speaking to that. And so in Numbers 33 through 9, it talks about how a woman, if she makes it as a girl, so, from when she's born and raised with her family, if she makes a vow or a promise, and if her father overrules her, then she can't do whatever she wanted to do. She has to abide by her father's overruling. And the Lord will forgive her for having such plans that her father was against, because her father overruled her. And then it goes on to say, and if she marries, now she's under her husband's authority. And now if he overrules her, or a commitment, pledge, vow that she's made, then his overruling is what stands. And then the last verse, it talks about every vow of a widow or of a divorced woman, then she's bound upon herself, so she can decide for herself. So just looking at that verse, a few thoughts that came to mind is, this is clearly setting the rule that men can overrule the girl and the woman. So all her life, her entire life, that she's under a man, or a man living with her, she's his dependent. And her plans for her future, her desires are all ultimately outside of her control. And this takes away her authority and independence, this rule. And so literally widowed and divorced women have more autonomy and independence than the average girl and woman. So that's the first one. I have a few examples of anything anyone wants to add to this one.
It feels like it makes the woman basically a foreigner or a transient in her own home, right? Like, she's not really in control of her own home, her own household. She hasn't got authority there. It's all subsumed in the coverture of her husband.
Right. She doesn't have agency of her own plans, future, ultimately.
I've been reading ahead of, I had to prepare. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be with like intelligent people who know stuff. And so like I had all my sources out that I haven't looked at in years, and I'd forgotten about the issue of coverture and how it kind of started with people's interpretations of biblical stuff, and Numbers has supported that for years. Just a thought.
So it reminds me of the story of Samson and Delilah. In Judges 14, Samson has been tricked by Delilah, and he goes out and he burns a field. And when he comes back, he says, I want to see my wife. Bring her out to me. And her father, even though he was already married to Delilah, her father took her and gave her to Samson's best friend.
Mm-hmm.
She's property. It wouldn't matter what she wanted to do, what she desired to do, who she wanted to be with. It wouldn't matter at all. Her father overruled that, and that overruling is just what it just jumped out at me in these passages that you were showing, and it's just.
You might be a puppy or a cat, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that leads perfectly into the next slide. Another verse that speaks to just what Deborah was talking about is Exodus 21, 7 through 11. So if a man sells his daughter as a servant, so think about that. That's like, in today's terms, that's human trafficking by your father, selling your daughter as a servant. She's not to go free as the males do. So there's already a sense of inequality there. If she doesn't please the master, then first he allows her to be redeemed. So meaning the father could buy her back, right? But he has no right, the master has no right to sell her because he's already bought her. He owns her. And then it talks about if he chooses now, just like what you were saying, Deborah, if he chooses that girl as his son's wife, so he gets to choose who she marries, then, she gets the rights of a daughter. But if the son chooses somebody else, so first of all, that implies that he's marrying somebody else besides this woman that his father bought for him. And it also implies that he has a choice to who he marries. Then they have responsibility to cover her food, clothing, and she does have marital rights. But if they don't give her food and clothing, then she can go free without payment. So like that's when she gets freedom, when they're no longer like wanting to provide any food or clothing for her.
And she has no recompense. She has no ability to receive any reparations for her time or her body. Yeah.
She's free. She's free to go apparently beg in the street. That's acceptable.
Right. And I think the fact, this is sort of like a dowry system, and there's several countries that still abide by this, payment in exchange for the wife, and, the father choosing for who the daughter marries. But in today's society, we don't do that because we acknowledge that that is unfair to women, that's treating women as a commodity.
Hmm.
I know I have heard people who are currently like trying to modernize Christian, like the whole "he gets us" movement, the weird craziness they're trying to, like, people are trying to argue. I've seen this on Twitter that, oh no, there are, Jesus and the apostles are actually very pro-woman, and in fact there are some pro-woman passages in the Old Testament too, and they go to Exodus and Numbers and they conveniently ignore a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now, and they'll talk to things about like, oh, but see, in like, for example, in Job there's inheritance rights, and he talks about his daughters, and in Numbers they relist inheritance rights, and I'm like, I feel like you're missing the bigger picture in those moments. They are not treated as persons in regards to much. They're almost argued as property in almost every instance that you read about women being mentioned, when they're mentioned at all.
Especially-
Actually, when I adopted my dog, there's better things that would happen to my dog if I wasn't satisfied with my dog compared to this, which of course I also had to pay for.
This the whole system of a dowry. I had so much internalized misogyny when my mom passed away, and it was right after I was recently married, and she had a little bit of a life insurance. And when I received my portion, I was like, "Look, I brought a dowry."
Right, price.
Yeah.
And
Good
if you
times.
think about the age of the context of these exchanges, I mean, these are girls who aren't even at the age to be able to make life decisions for the rest of their life, and yet their father's making it for them. And this is almost like evidence of discrimination and enslavement of children.
Yeah, and it's because you're buying a baby maker.
I mean, it's
Against
telling
her
when you
will.
look.
She doesn't get to have a choice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's telling when you look at any of the property lists that you see in some of the more legalistic sections, right? Like where they start laying out like the Ten Commandments and what have you. Women women and wives are listed among things like land and oxen, and I mean it's pretty plain, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go back to Genesis, when Adam was created, he was brought to all the animals before him, and he named them all. And right after that, it says that he could not find a suitable mate among the animals. And it's like almost like an afterthought. And that's why Eve was created. Great. Yay.
But you
Less
don't like the
valuable
cow
than
I gave
animals.
you?
Yeah, less valuable than animals. It's pretty gross.
So in the next example, we talked about the father making the decision. Well, now it's the what's the word, like the victimizer or the criminal that has the choice over the woman. So in Deuteronomy 22 verse 28 through 29, it says, if a man find a damsel that's a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her and lie with her, which I guess it could mean he's sleeping with her, but also could mean he's raping her. Then the man that lie with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, so he can buy her now that he's raped her, and she shall be his wife, because he's humbled her, and he may not put her away all his days. So meaning she was tainted. She's the victim, but yet now she's damaged goods and not likely to get married off in the traditional way. So now this guy is now being offered or being told that he should pay for her and keep her as his wife. And the woman, again, this victim, does not have a say in the fact that she's getting married off to her her victimizer.
Well, I think there's more than just an indication that she's been, can we say the word or shall I use grape? It says lay hold on her. That word hold is going to be the indication that that is definitely an SA.
Yeah, I think it isn't the word that they end up choosing in the original text. I believe, if I remember, this was years ago. It was the same word that was used in other areas of the Bible to explicitly, yes, mean that we are talking about SA. So if it's another man's wife, then the man is punished with death. But if it's a virgin girl that's not engaged, well, then you're required to marry her and pay the bride price. You broke it, you buy it, basically. Is that the origin of this policy?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to divorce her either. Like, oh, poor guy. So basically, like, if he wants to marry this attractive young woman, and she's refusing his advances, well, I guess he can just rape her and then pay for it.
Yeah.
Basically what that sounds like it's condoning.
And literally her virginity is more valued than her dignity, her agency, her voice, her feelings, her plans for her future.
Yeah. It's the modern day comparison that men make, describing women who are not virgins as used cars. How many miles does she have?
Oh, I'm having like purity culture flashbacks. The whole like, okay, everybody, now we're gonna take the chewed gum. Does anybody else want to chew this gum? You're like, oh, that's what you're equating women to? Ooh, sorry, this bad sex ed stuff.
No, that's exactly the same thing that I got in youth group as a kid. That's the same thing.
Really?
Yeah.
Awful lessons.
Chewed
terrible.
gum.
We never went into any of that when I was growing up in church.
How come we don't see examples about chewed hot dogs? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean,
I love
there's so much of a double standard. Men are never responsible. They never preach from the pulpits that if a man lusts after a woman, he should pluck his eye out. They never talk about that. It's always the woman's responsibility for his decisions, his mistake, where his eyes go, his gaze, his thoughts. It's all her. Do not cause a man to stumble.
Right. There's so many instances where men are admonished, and like the verbs that are used and the tenses that are used, the gendered language that's used throughout the Bible, and a lot of these pieces of this is what you should or shouldn't do. They're using like the masculine form. So there are men writing for men, addressing them as men, and telling them, stay away from licentious women. Watch out for the woman who tries to corrupt you. They never tell women things like watch out for the man that's wants to be harmful or beat you. And they tell men to honor their wives, but where's the counterpoint for honoring your husband? They don't say anything like that. They don't talk to women at all. Like, women are not only treated as property, they're not even considered as possibly even learning any of this.
The punishment's much harsher for the woman who, tempted the man, as you explained. They get the punishment of eternal. We'll speak more on the following slide, but speaking to now all women shouldn't be listened to because Eve tempted Adam to make this mistake. But yet, as y'all said, like, what about the men who are murdering and committing adultery? And where's the harsh punishment for them? No, they're glorified as heroes and followers of God.
Well, what does
if we
God
go back
do?
to
Think about it. What does God do?
Well, I was going to bring that up because it's the entire Bible talks about the church being the bride, right? And if the bride is not suitable, or if she has strayed, look at Ezekiel chapter 16. The bride is called a whore over 30 times, I think, in that chapter, that one chapter alone. It is absolutely a male-dominated religion because the God of the Bible has a pronoun he, him.
Mm-hmm.
Weren't the original Gnostic texts actually using an ambiguous, non-gendered term?
Could
Well, and
be, but
the
it's not
Hebrew
what we're taught
Bible
now.
uses a lot of Elohim, which is actually plural gods, and
Mm.
that's coming from the Canaanite religion and their god El. Elohim
Right.
is this god's
Their
council,
pantheon.
El's sons. Yeah, it comes from that.
Yeah, the Elohist and the Yahwist threads that run throughout the Old Testament are actually really fascinating to look into.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this next verse, now we're moving on to the New Testament. And first of all, I do want to make a comment because I think a lot of people would see the Old Testament verses and be like, oh, well, Jesus came to change all that. And there's many examples where Jesus is with women and elevates women. But if the New Testament's also inspired verses from God, let's see what the actual text is saying, because you can't justify or explain away all the the bad examples with good examples, or that Jesus came. Like, this is still supposedly from God and how he feels things should be. So in 1 Timothy 2:11-14, it says, let a woman learn in silence with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first. What does this have to do with anything? Then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and fell into transgression. So now that means that for all of eternity, all women are to remain silent in submission.
So this reminds me of another verse from 1 Corinthians 11:8-10. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman was created for man. For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head because of the angels. What did the angels have to do with anything at this point?
Yeah.
That is baffling.
The only thing that I could think of why that is brought into the conversation is because in what was it, Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God came and took the daughters of Eve because they were beautiful for themselves and mated with them, right? So whether they're sons of God, whether they're angels, God created them with genitals apparently, and now they're corrupting mankind. This is where the Nephilim are introduced. This is the only reason why I would think that would be brought in. But again, it's victim blaming.
And
It's
you
pretty
know,
much the
you're
whole of
thinking
the
about that,
religion.
how they describe the Ephelims. What would these people actually look like? You know?
Don't know.
Yeah.
Sci-fi movies. Let's have it.
Are we going with biblically accurate angels time? Is that what's
Oh.
next?
And it's even more illogical because going back to blaming it on the fact that, you know, women should be quiet and should not have a voice because the story about Adam and Eve was the one who was deceived.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, like, can't a loving, forgiving God forgive Eve for this one transgression, especially given the fact that he created them not knowing the difference between right and wrong?
Right.
Like, you don't know the difference, so why be so harsh by doing this thing to curse all women for all of eternity, and not to mention
all of
the
humankind.
fact
Well,
Right.
think you're a narcissist, and she gets to find out the first thing from the tree of knowledge before the man does. So she knows all her shit before he does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, and we're gonna just briefly. We could also point out that God lied and the snake told the truth. I'm just, one point of that story that I always kind of feel like is important to point out is that God said, "Oh, if you eat that, same day you eat that, you're dead. You die." And then the snake comes along and is like, well, no, you're not going to die. You learn stuff. I mean, the name of the tree is, the knowledge of good and evil.
Knowledge.
That's right. So you
No,
learn, you get knowledge.
knowledge is forbidden. And God actually confirmed it, and he's like, they're like us. Oh my gosh, we have to kick them out of the Garden of Eden so they don't eat of the tree of life and live forever, which is weird. But I thought the whole end goal for mankind, Matthew 5:48, I think it is, it says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Well, if he has the knowledge of good and evil, why wouldn't we want to be like him?
And moreover, why isn't he punishing himself? I mean, if he punishes humankind for learning the difference between good and evil, and he knows good and evil, why isn't he condemned? Also, if it's a perfect creator being and nothing is impossible for this being, why is it that you must punish everybody forever instead of just forgiving everyone forever? Or why even make sin possible in the first place? These things, I don't know, we're getting off topic if I start getting into that. But the passage, I feel like, to be fair, the 1 Timothy passage, what's often pointed out to me are two key things. That passage, the excuse I'm often given by theists is that passage is explicitly talking to congregants about church practices within a given specific period of time. That's usually the excuse. You got to remember context or whatever. So they're talking about when you're in church, a woman isn't allowed to preside over the men, which I still kind of go, okay, but that's still sexist and wrong. But anyway, the other thing I've heard recently is like, I mean, just because but it's only in church, and it was, well, wouldn't it have still been sexist and wrong then? Anyway, but 1 Timothy is apparently, the authorship of 1 Timothy has been thrown into question. I haven't really read papers on it yet, but somebody has told me that actually it's a forgery. They've gone so far as to use that term, forgery. I haven't looked into this yet, and I'm thinking, like, so all that does to me is just impugn the validity of the Bible as a whole. Because, I mean, if it's the true and perfect word of God and we know for certain that it's a forgery, oops.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and one
Kim-
argument I heard too is like, oh, well, back then women weren't educated. That's why they couldn't speak and that's why they couldn't teach. But it says there in the verse, let women learn. They're okay with women being educated. And what we do know about that time is there were women being worshipped as goddesses. Cleopatra was a queen, a political leader. And so what makes more sense, adding to what Fern was saying, is that this is really a polemic against women, like trying to take away their power and put blame on them. So speaking against the leadership of women during that time.
If we go back to verse 9 of 1 Timothy, it says, in like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety. If we go back to that word sobriety, it's super interesting because it has nothing to do with alcohol. Merriam-Webster lists the word sober as a synonym for continent. They're both very archaic words, but it also means restrictive or self-abnegating. Now, self-abnegating means to hold oneself back with effort from gratifying oneself or advancing one's interests. They're literally this, back in the day when people understood what these words meant, this was like, they're not even hiding it. It's all about control and manipulation. It's a narrative to keep women in check, not just silent.
Yeah, there's throughout 1 Timothy, it's probably some of the worst of the marginalization of the feminine, where the authors discuss worship, saying, the men should pray, but women should dress themselves modestly and decently, like you've mentioned. So basically, men are supposed to engage in the spiritual stuff. Women are just supposed to shut up and sit down, sit still, look pretty. Like, it's a pretty big contrast already. And then the passage that you've got cited there, the 11 through 14, about remaining silent, you're not allowed to have authority or speak. And it gives the excuse that, Adam was first, and so women came second, so they're less than, and they sinned first, so, they're bad, women bad. And then the final blow, if you actually go to Timothy, 1 Timothy 2:15, is that a woman is quote unquote saved through childbirth if she remains in faith and love and sanctification with modesty. Now, that's a lot of stupid language, but basically, you have to make babies in order to be saved. If you're a woman, like, that's it. You don't get to do anything else. You're not going to teach, you're not going to pray, you're not going to be part of the temple, any ceremonies. You have babies, especially male babies. Sorry, just anger. I've got to be quiet now.
Well, so there's another scripture that says that if a woman has a question, she needs to ask her husband at home.
Yes.
But in addition to that, there's like this overarching, like, hidden narrative or agenda in that's basically telling the reader women are the ones that are going to have questions. Therefore, they're stupid. They don't have the ability to comprehend information just because of what's between their legs.
Mm-hmm.
Call it out.
Wait, do you have an innie or an outie? Oh, it's an innie? Well, you're too dumb to understand. I'll explain
Right.
it to you.
It just sounds to me like the men who did all these writings are just insanely insecure.
Mm-hmm.
Men writing for men about a great big Superman.
And
Well,
I hear the argument too, like, well, they have different roles. Men and women have different roles, but they're still equal. But if the woman can't speak, if the woman doesn't have agency, that's not equality. That's
No. It's not
more
not
than just a different role.
How do they even see equal there? I mean, how brainwashed do you have to be? And then you're arguing against yourself.
I mean, there are narratives where wives refer to their husbands as lords, like rulers. They call them, "If my lord do allow me," like Sarah in Genesis somewhere. And in fact, a woman's religious vows can be nullified by her. I think we talked about this earlier, by her father or her husband, in Numbers 30s when we talked about that earlier. Like, in no way is that an equality if she can and cannot. If she cannot choose A, who she marries and who she lays with or what have you, and B, whether or not that marriage continues, where is there equality in that? All those household codes in the New Testament, men are commanded to love their wives and avoid treating them harshly, but women are commanded to submit, right? The Colossians and Ephesians, the bride price, it reveals that marriage is, at least in some respect, a property transfer. A payment's been made to acquire the bride, and that's in Genesis, it's in Exodus, it's for Samuel. I mean, it's here I go. I'm getting angry again.
Well, so many scholars believe that the book of Job was written first. And when Job starts to plead before God near the end of the book, he calls out to Job and he's saying, "What did I do? What did I do?" And he says in Job 31 verse 9, he says, "If mine heart have been deceived by a woman."
Oh.
So yeah, so even there, even if we're going to put Job at the very beginning and say, it still is blaming women for his. He's there's no responsibility. It's her fault. Even Adam said it's her fault.
And I think
the
about
first thing
the
Adam did was sell her out.
Yeah.
What a punk. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that leads perfectly into the next example. What Fern was saying about women women treating their husbands like Lord, like God. I don't know if Wes can move to the next slide. Perfect. This is from Ephesians 5:22-24. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. So just to stop right there, think about this. Like, submitting yourself is the greatest sacrifice you could ever give. Your mind, your voice, your life choices. There's no greater sacrifice you could make. And yet this is how you're submitting yourself to your husband. And it's as the Lord. It's literally saying, as you would worship God, that's how you submit yourself to your husband. And if you keep reading, it says, for the husband's the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. So again, making that comparison, his body, of which he is a savior. So in this comparison, the husband is the savior.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about, well, what does submitting look like? Like, what areas is he in dominion over? Well, read the next part. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
In everything. Yeah.
These are life-changing decisions.
It's interesting because that narrative right there kind of contradicts the Proverb 31 woman. And I love hearing these debates in social media where the guys are like, oh, look at the Proverbs 31 woman. She makes her arms strong. This is the dog whistle key codes to other men stating that women should be fit, right? They should keep themselves beautiful and
Yes, it's all about their desirability to other men.
Right. Because the prettier the trophy wife, the better they are. But they forget to look at, she actually made a decision. She sold belts to the tradesmen. She was praised in the gates. She considered a field and bought it from her own earnings.
It's a complicated relationship though. Like,
yes.
It's not a cut and dry, simple, like, nope, she has zero power whatsoever. No, I mean, to be fair, there are a lot of instances, where there are exceptions to this rule that women are always subordinate to men. But predominantly, like a good 95% of the time,
yes,
the feminine is going to be squashed and subsumed beneath the masculine.
Right. Well, there's two things to consider there. One of them is she didn't do it alone. If you read the text very carefully, she had her own female slaves.
And
the other thing,
some of her power was imbued from her relationship to men too. Let's not forget that. And at the permission of men. Like, if men didn't want to let her get away with that, they wouldn't have. That's
true. That's very true. I tried to mention Proverbs 31 to the transformed wife, Lori Alexander, and putting one verse from Proverb 31 in the chat, and I was immediately blocked. There's so much internal misogyny from even the religious fundamental right that they don't even want to hear from their own book something that might contradict it. And so women are the religious women, including myself back in the day, we were virtually punching ourselves in the face, creating a more detrimental environment for our own well-being.
Just the feminine infighting has always been an issue. I suppose it wouldn't suspend itself when it starts to do so under a misogynistic religious order.
Correct. Yeah.
And if you think about other religions, like in Islam, the Sharia law, in some countries where women can't even drive anywhere, they can't go anywhere without a man escorting them without their permission, can't go to school, like that's part of the husband deciding, no, you don't need that. This is the same philosophy being applied, and we can see that as wrong from another culture, but in Christianity, it's hard to see that. That's also in your book too. Your book's saying that same thing.
Well, it's interesting that they told on themselves recently. They're not even hiding it anymore. They said that the greatest threat to religion is literacy.
Oh, I have memes
Wow.
of church signs full of anti-intellectualism about how
Yeah.
knowledge is the opposite of godliness, and just so many instances. It's horrific.
Yes.
Hey, before we go too far, I do want to point out, I keep thinking of this when it keeps referring to Christ as the head of the church and the church is as his wife. No wonder we all feel so screwed. Okay, I'm done. That's it. That's my joke.
Well, okay, so I actually saw a TikTok just recently, and I thought it's funny, and it kind of relates to what you just said. Um, Jesus was called his, only begotten son. And so if he only has one begotten son, then are the rest of everybody else just the daughters? So yeah,
Another
we're all
reason
getting
we all feel
screwed.
so screwed. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the other thing I was thinking about, do y'all remember seeing that social experiment where a teacher told one group of kids, like the kids with brown eyes are
Lies and brown
superior,
eyes.
are smarter and all that, and they
Yeah.
start acting like
Mhm.
superior, leading, getting more confident, answering more
Mhm.
questions right. And then the next day she's like, oh, sorry, I was mistaken. It's actually the kids with the blue eyes. And then the kids with the blue eyes then kind of rose up and was leading. And that was
Well,
one day impact.
At
Think
least I got
about
my
it.
day. I got my
Yeah.
one day. Too bad I
Think
had to suffer
about
through those
women
brown
being
eyes first.
told their whole life,
Mhm.
no, submit, you learn to silence your voice. You learn to
Mhm.
put the man's desires and plans ahead of your own.
A friend of,
I'm sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead, Fern.
No, it's all right.
Okay.
You're the smart one.
Uh,
You talk.
So it's interesting that you talk about eyes because I actually have that in my book. Leah seemed to have something wrong with her eyes, but Rebecca was beautiful. And Rachel was counted as being very fair to look upon and a virgin, right? So when you take all of this into consideration, it's not just the sexual purity, it's how beautiful are you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just like those cows, and you bring them to market to sell them, and you're showing them off.
Yeah, I know.
And then if you go to the next slide, there's another point I wanted to hit on, that when you do place, Christ first, husband's made first, or man's made first, and then
Oh.
wife is secondary. She's under the husband. She's got to submit to the husband, ask the husband. You're also creating distance between the wife and Christ. She can't ask questions. She can't go to the church. She has to go to her husband. There's literally a division between the wife and the church.
Mhm. Yeah, if a man has felt offended by a woman, he doesn't go directly to her. He goes to her husband. Go to the master. Yeah.
It's interesting. This tiered umbrella thing, I was just realizing, I sort of liken this to something I saw that was very similar, where it has God or Christ, whatever, at the very top as well, but then it has the church, where the husband is in this illustration, and then it has the laity, where the wife is in this illustration. So apparently, despite some of the language that they use, especially particularly the Catholic Church, which is, why the Protestants broke away, felt that it was their duty to shepherd the laity to God, that only through the church could they have that communion. And it just seems like Protestantism just basically made the husband the church and the wife the laity. And kids, whatever, their property too.
Yes. I go into that into some detail too. Even a woman if two men are fighting and a wife comes forth and tries to take her husband's adversary by the secrets, you're supposed to cut off her hand and not even pity her. Like, she can't even help a man in a fight, even if his life is being threatened. She wants to save her master because that's where she gets her value from, is being with this man.
Oh, wait. That was the one. Is this the passage where, like, if two men are fighting and she grabs her husband's opponent by the testicles or something?
Yes. It's in Deuteronomy 25, verses 11 through
Yeah.
12. Yeah.
That one's hilarious because I keep thinking, like, you don't make laws about things that don't happen. So,
Right.
so somebody somewhere had a fight.
Yeah, somebody felt offended.
But somebody's wife grabbed somebody's junk.
You know, why it begs the question, if men are the stronger vessel and if they are supposed to be the leaders, why in the world would they be offended by a strong woman?
It threatens
Why would they
them.
feel threatened? Right. But why?
Because they're
If
insecure.
they're strong, exactly. Exactly. This goes to, heaven forbid we expose insecurity in men.
I think that maybe that in a way that tacitly acknowledges that they don't feel the strength they claim and that they don't truly believe in that strength. So they know they are duplicitous in their portrayal of their superiority and they're aware of it.
Yeah.
But,
And if you
maybe I'm
think about
raising
it,
that.
Kat, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. When
Sure.
it's talking about submitting everything, let's talk about what that entails. That's your finances, sex, household duties, how the children should be raised, how they should be disciplined, how many children you should have, the role of the family members, the future plans of the family. So I think there's an aspect where this model could produce a very happy, productive marriage. Like if the man is a good leader and everything and really does put the wife's needs as a priority, then this model could work. But that's a big if. And not all men are leaders or skilled in every single aspect of their life. There's many times where the woman should have dominion and say because she's more involved or more knowledgeable or more impacted. Whereas this verse kind of takes that value away from women.
This is, I think, why the vows that are taken talk about until death do you part. 1 Corinthians 7:39 says the wife is bound by the law as long as her husband lives. But if her husband be dead, well, then she is at liberty to be married whom she will, only in the Lord. So go find another godly man. That's all you're allowed to choose from.
Is that
But
what
only
in the
if your
Lord
man
means?
is. That's
always
how
wondered
I
that.
took it. That's
They
how I took
they
it.
say words like that, like we are something in the Lord or in Christ, and I'm always like, what does that mean? Do I like make a 3D model of Christ and then stand inside it? I don't understand. It's very strange. Also, it makes me think this sounds a lot like authoritarianism to me, like the argument that like, yeah, it can work because there's one person making the decisions. It means that if everybody just follows orders, then everything can work in an orderly fashion. But we see what that comes to. Like, we've seen how authoritarianism turns out, and it doesn't tend to work out very well for the people under authority.
Paul wasn't even married, but according to him, if a man puts his wife away, she should remain unmarried or get back together with the man. 1 Corinthians 7:39 says, but she is happier if she so abide after my judgment. And I think also that I have the Spirit of God. Oh, you think you do? Just think. It's not no, but that's funny. But he seems to know better what women want and how they're happy than women.
Yeah.
And then in first.
Oh, please go ahead.
Okay. In 1 Timothy, it says, I will therefore the younger women who are widows to marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully, for some have already turned to Satan. how
plan.
wonderful for you to just have made that claim without any proof. And yeah,
I don't know, Deborah. I think that's a good plan, personally. They were wising up.
I mean, if Satan was the one that informed the snake in the garden, I'm kind of inclined. The snake told the truth, so I'm just saying,
I
if it
know.
was Satan, although there isn't really good support for that thing, that the snake, the serpent was Satan, but still, just on the off chance, let's just see what Satan has to say.
Yeah.
And being, you know, sympathetic to the man, I mean, think about how much pressure that is. Everything is on your shoulders. If something's not going right, ultimately it's on you because you're the head, you're the leader. I mean, that's a lot of pressure on the guys, and sometimes that also gives them a god complex or an authority that justifies abusing women or taking advantage of that, and, you know, making the woman subservient or obedient to the man. So, you know, this can be really problematic to follow this structure.
Yeah, it's just not healthy all the way around for anybody. You know, it might sound all great to have all the power and stuff, but then once you find out, I think that it's not so hot.
Which is
And
why we
here's-
give generals limited time to have control over the military. Like, in war, this general has authority, and everybody answers to them, but once the war's over, no more. So settling conflicts, authoritarianism can be useful, but not in all contexts. Thank you, Bible.
Yeah.
And the real mind game or brainwashing that happens is that women are taught to want to be submissive and want to be subservient because that's equated to pleasing God. You know,
Right.
you think that you're doing the holy thing that God likes, that he's going to bless you, shower you with favor, eternity in heaven. So you think that you want that.
Who would want to disappoint God, the creator of the no one wants to disappoint God, no one wants to disappoint their parents, no one wants to disappoint their husbands, right? Because we don't like conflict. We are compassionate naturally. We're nurturing naturally. And they just use that and they weaponize it to such a degree that women don't even realize they're being oppressed that bad.
I would say some of us realize.
I have a quote from Gloria Steinem from the Vagina Monologues. No wonder male religious leaders too often say that humans were born into sin, because we were born to female creatures. Only by obeying the rules of the patriarchy can we be reborn through men. No wonder priests and ministers in skirts sprinkle imitation birth fluid over our heads, give us new names, and promise rebirth into everlasting life. They can't become women, but they want to reproduce that birth process into a patriarchy.
Oh, well said. Yeah, because they turned the creation narrative. It's not women, the one who can actually create life,
Right.
and further the whole human population. Of course, you know, you need the man too, but the woman's actually the one who grows and births the baby. But they turn the narrative to be like, oh, woman came from the man's rib. Yeah, that's how it happened.
Right.
Well, women, a rib is strong and dirt is not. That's all I have to say.
Neither one are really how women came about.
No.
You know, they used to have some of the oldest religions that we can find through archaeology. They used to worship the pregnant torso.
Yes.
No more. Women are not revered anymore. And we're seeing a huge fight against the independence and agency of women. And so I'm glad that we have these platforms to speak on.
Absolutely. Archaeological evidence shows many female cults or goddesses being worshipped before the biblical writers or the authorship.
Maybe they were jealous.
That's literally why it's a polemic against women, to take away the power from women.
Right.
If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, there was one more one more verse. And I think Deborah mentioned this one. 1 Corinthians 33 through 35. For God is not a God of disorder, but of peace, as in all the congregations of the Lord's people. Women should remain silent in churches. They're not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it's disgraceful for women to speak in church. So it's basically saying God finds it disgraceful for women to speak in church.
Yeah. Going back to Genesis, where it says that he shall rule, your desire shall be for your husband and he shall rule over you, Genesis 3:16. But if you look at some of these other things, 1 Timothy 5:17 says, let the elders that rule be counted worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in the word and in the doctrine. So you should give your husband not just honor and respect, but double honor, because he rules over you.
Double honor? Was that like a reach around?
I don't know.
And the way that they describe women as being desirable, or their value as seen in men's eyes, is a godly woman, constantly, seeking scripture, dressing modestly. That's what women are taught that men should want.
Hey, if you want a good wife, go look in the church. At 1 Timothy 5:19, against an elder receive not an accusation, but before 2 or 3 witnesses. So a wife can't even accuse her husband without witnesses. How convenient for them to write in all of these ways that they can get away with all kinds of BS.
Does it remind anybody else of like when you were a kid and you were playing a game that you'd never heard of, and the other person who was supposed to be teaching you the game seemed to just be making up new rules all the time? And like, well, it works like this. Oh, okay, well then I do this. Oh, well, it doesn't work like that if you have red hair. I mean, just
right.
Ad hoc kind of. Oh, and the rule's this now because men are better.
The firewalls and the backstops to make sure that they've got all of their little boxes checked to make sure that the women stay right here.
It's so
right
legalistic.
here.
So
And imagine
right here.
Imagine if you're one of the countless women who have been abused by church leadership, many types of abuse. I mean, right there, women should remain silent in the churches. They're not allowed to speak. I mean, that's justifying not speaking out against your abusers.
I just think how scary that would be,
I mean, being a woman nowadays is horrifying enough. Like, imagine, it's terrifying. I've been recently going through Proverbs. I listened to another podcast. I hang out with these people on Discord, Sacrilegious Discourse, and they're just 2 people that were raised atheist, and they're reading the Bible just cover to cover without like any kind of scholastic guidance or what have you. And we're currently going through Proverbs, so I've been noticing how heavily women are marginalized in the book of Proverbs. They use the phrase "my son" and "our sons," and if he has, and if his son goes out, and that they use he pronouns quite a bit. The phrase "my daughter," I haven't even heard it once, not a single time in all of Proverbs. And it's what I actually do kind of enjoy some of the scholastic side of it. So I've looked at some of the commands in Proverbs, and if you look at the original text, they're consistently second person masculine. They're never second person feminine. And the relationship of the book of Proverbs is basically don't let a woman with honeyed lips seduce you. But there's nothing warning women to beware of male seducers. None, not at all, that I've seen yet. They say
or
living with
male
contentious
abusers.
women. Right, contentious women are terrible, but they say nothing about contentious men.
Right.
It's written to men, not women. So, like, noble wife, that phrase came up. She's benevolent and hardworking. She's entrepreneurial, loves her sons and her husband. They don't mention that she loves her daughters. And the readers are encouraged to find a wife. But there's no counterpart for the noble wife text. There's nothing in the book that says that I found at all that says encourages a woman to find a noble husband or one who will treat her kindly or generously. Men were the intended readers of the book, not women. So it's, I mean, it seems kind of one-sided here. Just an opinion.
It's not kind of. Look at Isaiah's wife in she's not named. There, she doesn't even get it. She's a prophetess, and she's not even given a name. Lot's wife, no name. I mean, we see that often.
Yeah, kind of blatant. Also, doesn't it kind of give polygamy polygyny is fine. It's like even approved of, I think, Genesis and Deuteronomy and somewhere else. But wives, don't ever get told they could have multiple husbands. So
Never.
I just see imbalances. That's all. I'm just seeing imbalances.
Well, I mean, look at modern day marriage. In many countries, women still give up their original name. When I got divorced, he had to sign a piece of paper to give me back my maiden name.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Really?
Wow.
When I had a medically necessary hysterectomy, I still had to get my husband's approval.
oh wow.
What state is this?
Well, see, the hysterectomy was in Nevada, and getting my maiden name back was Georgia.
I mean, Georgia doesn't totally shock me, but I'm kind of surprised to hear about Nevada.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think about, and this was in Arizona.
To have a tubal ligation in California, I had to have my husband's approval. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you guys you'll find this.
A lot of
this
places
very,
are like
very
that.
common. Very
Yeah.
common.
Yes.
Right.
I'm so not up on my feminist rhetoric.
And I think about too, these practices are still seen today. For example, my friend's mother was beat by her husband. Her husband cheated on her, so they got a divorce in the Catholic Church. Well, then she was shunned from going back to the church. She was treated very badly.
Mm-hmm. It's
Because
common.
divorce is seen as, you don't do that, and now you're tainted, whatever the Catholic view is. But I mean,
well, even the Lutheran pastor, I had a Lutheran pastor tell me, you need to stay together, regardless of the fact that I was so unhappy that I had thoughts that, I wanted my son to have a mother, so I did leave. But the Lutheran pastor tried to convince me to stay, regardless of what I was going through mentally. Didn't matter.
Okay, I'm gonna rant. Never mind.
And Kat, would you mind going to the last slide about the impact today? Because I feel like that's what we're talking about. Okay. So this is one scenario I heard of recently about a girl, a woman who was in a toxic relationship for way too long because she had the mindset like God sent him to me and this is what God wants for me, and I'm supposed to be learning my lesson. I'm supposed to submit to him. And so I think this can keep women in toxic relationships for far too long instead of admitting, okay, no, he's not ordained by God. He doesn't have the right to rule over me and have these bad intentions for me or bad treatment of me or run our lives into the ground. Many reasons why this could lead to toxic relationships.
When the framework, I shouldn't say the framework, the foundation of your entire worldview from the indoctrination in childhood through cultural socializing has been to tell you that women are subservient to men, that they are secondary citizens in every way. They are simply an offspring or offshoot of the masculine. Like, it's kind of hard to convince an ordinary everyday woman to look at her own best interest and say, hey, look, you should have a right to your own agency. You should have the capacity to put yourself in control of your own choices and outcomes. It's that if that framework is there, that house is stuck on it, and you have to break apart that framework, which can be so difficult and fearful, and frankly, it disrupts your life like considerably.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you just think about people too that have been in this literally for decades, and then they're trying to come out of it, they don't even realize all the problems this has caused them with their relationships with other people. They're not even really aware of it all. They slowly can get aware of it too, but then you still have the culture around you reinforcing that.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's so hard to break the mindset that you're supposed to silence your voice, and especially when other people have that perspective too, that you should be silent. It makes it even harder to fight against that mindset.
Well, the
Yeah,
shunning
it's
that you mentioned,
incredibly
yeah.
pervasive. It's
Yeah.
everywhere. It's everywhere. And now
When
they're
you-
trying to, get it into schools as much as they can too.
When you have women who are joining the fight alongside men to silence other women, it becomes incredibly much more difficult. I had gotten a job at a female-owned business and found out that the owner and her daughter that also worked there, incredibly religious. And I was let go from that company 2 months later because I was told I didn't have enough grace and grit. Now, tell me, would they ever have told that to a man?
I mean, I think
you
it would
don't
be
have
funny
enough grace,
to do
sir.
that. I think you should hire a man just so you can fire him for that exact reason. I think that would be hilarious.
Right. See how well that goes.
I think
See
it'd
how
be
well that
great.
goes.
Enjoy the lawsuit, but still. I'm reminded because right now, like in the last few days, I've been talking very, very at length with a person who's becoming a very close friend, who is actually a Seventh-day Adventist, and is coping with some very, very big difficulties in her personal relationships. And I understand it as largely, to me, it's clear that this is because of the misogyny that you've been bred with, that you've been indoctrinated with. And she just wants to keep making excuses for this like horrible double standard that she's constantly being put through, and justifying the mindset that like, well, but the church is still good and God is still great. And I'm like, you're not seeing that this has to do with your belief in that God as a patriarchal figure that makes you a secondary subservient person. You're barely granted personhood in your own theology. And she doesn't want to talk about her theology. She wants to talk about her relationship. And I'm like, you can't separate those. I'm sorry.
The ultimate gaslighting,
Seriously.
You are at fault. You are to blame. You should adhere to your husband's leadership. And I think about, like, in reality, think about how many men struggle with mental health issues, maybe with addiction, who may not be in tune with what the kids really need, what the best parenting strategies are. Maybe they were raised not with good examples, and yet we're putting them in the pilot seat for the whole family. Like, that's not always the best decision, and especially women do. It can be strength and can be value in those different aspects of the marriage.
And that's actually a really excellent point, that misogyny hurts men as much as it does women and people like me who are in between. Like, that structure puts a huge straitjacket on being masculine too, right? Like, it doesn't allow certain liberties. All of a sudden, one's manhood and authority is in question if they take up anything that is deemed womanly or wifely. The whole structure of like how we understand the masculine and the feminine in power dynamics in our society is based largely on these same cultures that we're talking about in biblical terms. You know, a lot of the Western culture was based on that, where the masculine was seen as the default, and women were the less masculine. They were basically men who had been removed of their masculinity, is kind of how they were seen. So there was no possibility of equality there. And that means that men are stuck with a specific kind of role that they may not actually be capable of or want.
Right.
And it can go in the opposite way. Like, for example, my husband was the one who was more of the stay-at-home parent, and I was the one working. And so this structure really didn't work for us, because it's like, how am I supposed to be the one, you know, nurturing, and he's the one who knows more about that, or I'm handling finances and he may not be best at that. And so like, how is he supposed to be in charge of that? So it was just like the opposite role reversal for us.
I was just going to say, they just did a study showing that apples to apples, women are better leaders. They're better CEOs than men. They outperform men when you put the same structure and the same statistics alongside each other. So, I mean,
Just because your chromosomes were this doesn't mean you can't teach, you can't speak, you can't, just because your chromosomes.
Or you think that's what they were.
Right.
You don't always know.
Right.
Your chromosomes may not match your innies and outies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Or based on your genitalia, which you could have both, you know. It's not a good
Just to be clear, that's what I meant by innies and outies, was genitalia.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to keep adding the lowest common denominator to everything today. You guys can do the scholarly, awesome stuff with all your research and your beautiful presentation, and I'll just keep making jokes about people's junk.
I was just looking at some of the comments in here, and I was thinking if anybody wanted to make any comments or had any questions, maybe you could put them in the chat right now.
And imagine if we did, sorry, I interrupted, but I was just thinking about, imagine if we did adopt this into society. Think about if women couldn't teach, that's like 90% of the schools. I mean, think about how that would impact our educational system. Imagine if women really had to be quiet. I mean, it would be so detrimental to our society.
Oh, here's a question that Wes had, and I think you guys would be able to answer this way better than I would. I'm going to put this up.
I assume we mean Mary Magdalene. Well, was she a prostitute? Honestly, I haven't looked much into the story of Mary Magdalene. I know that sounds a little weird, but I haven't yet.
Doesn't sound weird to me, Fern. I don't like to really look into the Bible stuff at all. I was like done with that 40 years ago. But here I am.
And yet you're still an excellent host. Thank you so much.
Well,
I don't know.
thank
What does our
you.
learned author over there? What does our wonderful author have to tell us about this?
Yeah, what do you think, Deborah?
I'm sorry. I was trying to find something. What were you?
Oh,
Squirrel.
About Mary
Sorry.
Magdalene.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know. There's not much about Mary Magdalene in Scripture. It doesn't seem to indicate that much of anything. I do know that there was a Mary who anointed. I think she was a prostitute who anointed Jesus specifically for his death. That's weird. Why would you even point that out? Why would that be a source of anything in the story? What value does it add to the story to say that this woman who, anointed, was she the one that washed his feet with her tears?
I was just wondering.
Maybe that's the one.
I thought she washed her, and didn't she use her hair?
To dry it, yeah. But again, why would, whether it was in what either story, I can't remember, why would it matter what she was outside of that story? It doesn't matter at all.
Does it feel a little bit like when is it feel a little bit like when your kind of racist uncle at Thanksgiving is telling you a story and keeps mentioning, because they were black, and you're like, what does that have to do with this?
Yes.
It's
As
the
a
same
young
thing.
girl, I was so disturbed when I read that, and then they'd bring it up once in a while. I'm just like, why are you bringing this up? It's just
The woman at the well, right? Who
Are we
he
allowed to use
told-
Are we allowed to use Wikipedia? Is that still a thing that we're?
I don't know. I use Google Scholar. Why would the woman at the well, where he said, you've been married 5 times and now you're living with somebody who's not your husband, why in the world did that have anything to do with her salvation or her value? Or why would they bring that up in the story? What past was told of a man in the Bible?
hey, maybe she, and here's another thing. Maybe they were all a bunch of assholes and jerks.
Yeah.
It's like, they're just all jerks. Well, and it seems to me it was a pretty jerky place to live if you're a woman. She was just trying to find somebody that wasn't a jerk. What's wrong
And he did
with
say
that?
unto Thomas, who was an asshole. Like, how come we didn't see that? Thomas, the big jerk face. Like, how come we don't hear those kinds of, yeah. Well, Magdalene was just like, that was just where she was from, I guess, right? Like, she lived in the town of Magdala, so it's kind of like, if you were to call me Fern Buffalonian.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I'm in Buffalo.
There's a couple of other things that I think are pertinent to the conversation. Women were trafficked even as far back as like the unaliving of entire nations in the Old Testament. And then, here's 32 virgins for God. Why does he need virgins, or even the priests for that matter? Why couldn't they just leave the town alone? If God was all powerful, he could have just created a whole new continent and separated the seas and said, go over there, do your thing over there. You don't have to unalive anybody. You don't have to, that didn't matter. But somehow when cities were completely decimated, women were considered booty.
Yep. The spoils of war.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the header of that paragraph in the King James Version counts them as pillaged booty, which is, ironic in this day and age. And I wonder
Keep the
if that
virgins for yourself.
I wonder if that word booty relates to property.
Is that like in the English Standard
Today.
Version? What version
Today.
is that?
It's King James. It's the King James.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't look at the King James. It's stupid.
Well, it's the one that most Christians see as the strongest authority, so I use it often.
Oh.
Well, when it comes to pirates, that's what booty is. It's they're stealing people's property.
Property, right. So
what's another name for pirate treasure? Sorry.
Yes.
Beastie Boys.
So there's one more quote that I wanted to bring up from Jiran J. Zhao from The Iron Widow. People love to ogle pretty girls, but they love to hate them even more. There's no one the masses are more obsessed with railing at than the women who dare to stray from the docile ideals of wives and mothers.
And it sounds like Celebrity as we understand it now. Oh my God, she's so hot. I hope she chokes and dies. It's just cattiness.
And if she's a
Terrible
successful
cattiness.
celebrity, could she really be a successful mother and house caretaker?
Indeed.
Well, I've said this before and I'll say it again. You don't colonize something that has no value. And women are being colonized day in and day out. They're trying to control them. They're the conquest. But you don't do that if they have no value.
Tell me that's in your book. I need to be able to cite that.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So good.
Well, I was just thinking we were kind of getting close to the
And
end here, so I
ironically,
was-
that value's being limited.
Yeah.
Oh. I was just thinking maybe if anybody had any last thoughts that they wanted to add, because we're getting close to the end here, and then I'm gonna think
Well,
a few other
I
people
feel
here.
I feel bad that we didn't really completely address the Mary Magdalene thing, so I did stupidly. I went ahead and went to Wikipedia just for a brief synopsis. So
Oh,
very
yeah.
quickly, it does say Mary Magdalene was one of the women who traveled with Jesus and helped support his ministry out of their resources, whatever that means, indicating that she was probably wealthy. The same passage also states that 7 demons had been driven out of her, which is interesting.
So she was a
statement
sugar mama?
sounds like it. She might have been a cougar. Although
Wow, okay.
that's that's cool. I got no problem with that. Go girl. But in all 4 canonical gospels, she was witness to the crucifixion of Jesus, and in the Synoptic Gospels, she was also present at his burial. So for some reason, this figure is really beloved. She's a saint by the Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, Anglican, and Lutheran denominations. So there we go. That's what we know about Mary Magdalene. It does have something further down about Mary Magdalene as a prostitute, but apparently that story didn't begin until 591 when Pope Gregory I conflated her with Mary of Bethany. So, oops.
So, additionally, there's one of the Gospels that talks about Mary Magdalene coming to the grave, and after Jesus is resurrected, he tells her, "Don't touch me." Now, why? Because he had not yet ascended to the Father. No other reason. 10 verses later, he says, "Hey, Thomas, go ahead and touch me."
Because are we going to conjecture on Jesus's orientation? I'm just saying, dude hung out with a lot
What
of
is all this
dudes.
touchy stuff?
Oh,
He hung out
And
with a
men.
lot of dudes. Didn't have a lot to do with women. It's like, yeah, whatever, women, da da da. But hey, guys, come unto me.
Let me wash your feet.
I don't know.
I'm just saying, feet was a euphemism back in the day for
Uh-huh.
other stuff. So we could
Wink,
conjecture
wink.
on it, but
Nudge, nudge. Yeah. Put his hand under
Rub
his
that
thigh.
hair
Wink,
around
wink,
there,
nudge,
babe.
nudge.
yeah. What was
Two
under
trailer
that
park
robe?
apostles go around the outside. Oh, sorry. Okay.
oh, I needed that. Thank you.
Okay, I do want to say one thing that like blew my mind when somebody asked me this. They asked me, "What if Jesus was born a woman?" And I was
Yes.
nothing. Like nothing would have come of this religion. No one would have.
Yeah,
This is,
nothing.
End
Yeah.
of
Well,
story.
but hold on. Jesus was born without the benefit of actual semen. So he technically only had an X chromosome. So if he
Well,
used masculine pronouns and claimed to be male, presented
Yeah.
male, wouldn't
Yeah.
Jesus be trans?
Well, additionally, up until the 6th week in utero, all embryos are
There you
female.
go.
So
Exactly.
technically, he's trans. Well, all men are trans,
All of us.
actually.
All humans are trans. Yes. There we go. Just saying. Jesus was trans.
Genetic
Stop treading on
expression.
trans Jesus.
That's right. Be nice, people.
All right, that's my
I'm sorry.
final statement. Jesus is trans. That's
Personally,
it.
I
That's the
personally prefer Lunchables Jesus, but that's just me.
Oh God.
What's
Oh,
lunch?
you just.
Jesus?
Well, what? You eat
You're
them once a
welcome.
month in church, don't you?
Oh, the crackers.
That is so gross. I don't even
With your
get
sippy
that.
juice.
Which, by
Wait,
the way, did y'all know that we also did that in Egyptian time with Horus and Osiris? There was the same thing because he was seen as the grain god, and so the bread and all of that was done
Yeah.
way before
Oh,
Jesus in the Bible.
There's so many
I
things
just
that were
love-
done before Jesus.
I love vicarious cannibalism, you know.
Who doesn't love eating their gods? I mean, you know,
That's so creepy.
deophagy.
Yeah. I almost passed out in church the first time I was kind of forced to do that over the thought of it.
You're not supposed to eat all of the wafers.
Well, and which part is it? What am I eating? A hand, a toe? What is it?
Oh man, the fun you can have by getting the sacrament and turning around and going, oh, I think that was a foot. Ew.
Toe jam. No, thank you.
Oh, did anybody else taste balls? I just tasted balls. Gross.
I was so hungry.
Told
I'm
you.
like, can I have yours? Can I have your piece?
Can I get like,
Oh
like
my
3 of
gosh.
those little wine cups? I need something to wash that down. What part of his body is the wine? Oh, it's blood. Okay, blood. Right, that's good. We're vampires.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Cannibalistic vampires. Exactly.
It's a blood cult.
It's a blood
death
cult.
cult. We know this.
Blood death cult. Yeah.
Mhm.
And they
All right.
accuse the Satanists of being, you know,
It's-
drinking
it's-
blood and
I mean, it's
sacrifice.
it is literally the same as dark matter. Imagine, let's just imagine for a moment. You have like this underground room with like morbid red lighting and candles and people in dark robes and hoods and things like that, and they're all around an altar and they're drinking wine and calling it blood, and they're eating bread and calling it flesh. What difference is it whether it's in a dark basement or in a church? This is all ritual magic.
The amount of money that you're expected to give. That's the difference.
Okay, my bad.
It's free if you're a Satanist.
Touche.
Well, and the
All right, I
type
feel
of
like we
wine
reached
you
the
get
end
too. I gotta say that.
Oh, well,
If
there's
it's
Yeah.
MD 2020, you're in the wrong church.
This was so fun, guys.
Yeah.
It was fun. I want to thank everybody so much for coming on, and I also want to thank our patrons that we have: Sydney Davis Jr., Eric Ozols, Rion, Denise Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Coalson, Phil Calderone, and Amanda McLeod. So we appreciate you very much. We do need to have that help to keep the lights running here. And I'd also like everybody to not to forget to check out our other shows on Skeptic Haven. We've got Secular Soapbox on Wednesdays. Thursdays is Sunny Spot. Saturday, Global Atheists. And where we are right now, Women Atheists Unload. I gotta say, this is kind of a favorite of my shows, but the rest of the shows don't get pissed off at me. I can't help it. And Let's Talk on Sunday. And anybody like to do a last plug for themselves in the show? Let's start with Apostate Anne.
Yeah, and you can find us on YouTube, Apostate of Mind podcast. Please subscribe. We recently put out an episode about this same topic, about patriarchy and the story of Adam and Eve and where that myth actually comes from, which is another myth. So if you're interested in learning more about that, that's our latest one. And thanks for having me on.
Oh, it was great having you on. And Fern, my favorite houseplant now ever.
Oh,
Is there
thank
anything you wanted to say?
Please water your plants. That's all.
Gotcha. And Deborah.
My spider plant right over there is healthy and happy, just so you know.
I did notice. I didn't want to say anything, but thank you.
Crucifying the Bible is available in all the formats on Amazon. I'm available on almost all the socials, more often than not lately, on TikTok and Facebook. You can still find me at Twitter and Instagram, my website, crucifyingthebible.com. But yeah, thank you guys for having me here. I've really appreciated it. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you too. It's been awesome. Hope to see everybody actually tomorrow, Sunday, on our Let's Talk show. So looking forward to seeing everybody later. Bye-bye.
I know you told your friend you're not okay. And tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I'm as you fade away, as you fade away.
Yeah, I'm about to fade away, 'cause every time I wake up I feel like it's Monday. Something's going